Right, so we are done with all the three presentations, and we have some time left to answer some more questions. So maybe I ask you, Ricardo, to come in and give us some answers about a few important questions that you see in the chat. Do you hear us? No, we don't hear you. Right.
Okay, so I think now I can.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
No,
No
you
problem.
got muted there.
That's no problem. I will go to fuel related questions and
Yes.
fuel certification, fuel use. So there was one question whether fossil fuels like HFO or marine diesel oil would also need to include a certificate for well-to-tank emission factor. No, these fuels will be given default emission factors per the table in Annex 2 of FuelEU. So HFO or marine diesel oil or any other fossil fuel not having any blended biofuel or synthetic fuel, they are just supplied as they are supplied today with the bunker delivery note and the receipt for the supply of the fuel. So there is nothing here. The emission factors applied will be those in Annex 2 of FuelEU without any possibility to deviate from these default factors. Also on the fuels, one question that came up in the chat and that we also have often is whether renewable and low carbon fuels used in international voyages would be counted entirely for FuelEU calculations or only half, being that only half of the energy in those voyages is counted in FuelEU. This is an important question to be clarified. This will also be clarified in our Q&A. So the greenhouse gas intensity calculation of the energy used on board of by FuelEU, the calculation is made on an annual average. So the calculation is made for the entire reporting period and for the entire energy used during that reporting period. And if, for instance, a blend B30 or any other blend is used on an international voyage, all the renewable fuel part can be counted for the calculation of this yearly average greenhouse gas intensity calculation, and this up to the limit of the energy that is in the scope for the calculations. So the system will allow this calculation to be made, and the renewable and low carbon fuel part will be able to be all allocated to the calculation of the greenhouse gas intensity of the energy used. This, of course, we have FuelEU, which is a first of a kind regulation, but if a similar framework is developed in a different country where the ship also calls, requiring similar reporting mechanism, of course, then there will be a decision from the company to allocate one amount of the fuel in one jurisdiction and the other amount in another. But this is, of course, a futuristic exercise. For the moment, in the calculation of FuelEU, and because we are being clear about the scope of the calculation, which is an annual average calculation covering all energy in scope of FuelEU, this is a possibility. Also, in terms of fuel certification, Important to note that the renewable and low carbon fuels, whether supplied as a single product or in blends with fossil fuels, they all need to be provided with an annex to the bunker delivery note, including the sustainability characteristics of the fuel, the well-to-tank emission factor, and elements included in Annex 1 of FuelEU. Only suppliers providing the relevant proof of sustainability can be in a way considered by operators to supply eligible fuels to count for FuelEU regulation. Any fuels, biofuels or synthetic fuels not able to provide this demonstration will be considered fossil fuels and given the corresponding emission factor to fossil fuels as included in the annex of FuelEU. Going here to other questions, Peter, I'm not sure you want to point me to any specific question, or I will.
It's up to.
Okay, good. There is also one on the whether ships can participate in more than one pool. In Article 21, related to pooling, a ship's compliance balance may not be included in more than one pool in the same reporting period. So this is relevant for, of course, the pooling of compliance balance with respect to greenhouse gas intensity. There is also the target of RFNBO, but this is for the moment not applicable and would only be applicable after 2034. There is a question on the penalty and understanding how much would be really the impact of the penalty already in 2025, in the period from 2025 to 2030, how much would be this penalty really impacting in terms of let's say euros per ton of fuel used, CO2 or per ton of fuel used. So just to give an example, we ran a few examples in order to illustrate what would be the level of the penalty. And taking into account the calculation formulas in FuelEU, and an example of a ship using 12,000 tons of HFO and 1,400 tons of marine diesel in intra-EU traffic over the reporting period between 2025 and 2030 for each year, for each reporting period, that he would continue business as usual. A penalty of around or just above 800,000 euros would be calculated, and then this, of course, can be divided by the tons of fuel or CO2 emitted, and corresponding figures can be derived. Similar calculations for penalties for not complying with the zero emissions at birth can be done, and even more deterrent figures can be determined on the basis of these calculations. And talking about penalties, of course, the discussion of who is the regulated entity or the responsible entity to pay these penalties is an immediate question, because if the ship management company or the ISM company is the responsible entity for FuelEU, then of course the question arises on when penalties are determined, then ship management companies would be faced with this important element to deal with. And here it's of utmost importance that contractual provisions are designed in a way, and this complementing what Peter just indicated about the responsible entity, that contractual provisions are in place not only for ship management contracts, but also for time charter contracts, for charter party contracts, that they include clear indication on liabilities, including payment of penalties, but also entitlements, because of who will be the party entitled through contract provisions to design application of flexibility mechanisms, such as providing for pooling or making use of pooling arrangements. Maybe I will try just another question. The one on the global warming potential is, of course, we also replied this before, but there is a link between FuelEU and the Renewable Energy Directive with respect to the global warming potential to be used for CO2 equivalent calculations. In the Renewable Energy Directive, it's still the global warming potential from the 4th assessment report from the IPCC. Now this will be upgraded, it will be updated to the 5th assessment report, and this will be consistent with the UMRV once this update is made in the Renewable Energy Directive. Peter, I'm not sure you want to.
Yeah, maybe I think you've done for most of the questions that are dealing with fuels. Maybe we can give the floor over to Jose and Caroline. There are some that is MRV related questions.
Thanks.
Yes. Thank you, Peter, for giving the floor. I will try to address some of the issues, some of the questions that we have. One of them is related to the XML, how to upload information for the monitoring plan. It is something that is foreseen in the submission of the monitoring plan for the FuelEU, similar to what's happening or what happened in the monitoring plan for the MRV. We plan to have that in conjunction with the publication of the templates for the MRV. So late June, early July, we have planned to share the XML template for companies that want to use that functionality to be able to prepare them to submit when the functionality is deployed in the TETI's MRV. But for the users that are already did the MRV monitoring plan, the functionalities will be very similar. We had also a question related to how the ISM companies will be able to use the system to submit the monitoring plan when the ship owner has the ship under its fleet. We will address these issues in the July webinar, where we'll have a detailed explanation about the new functionalities. So what presented today as a monitoring plan, as you see, is mock-ups. When we have the functionality ready for testing, we will prepare the presentation and we will deliver the webinar in July and prepare some tutorials to clearly explain how companies will be able to submit the FuelEU monitoring plan. At the moment, the functionalities isn't deployed in the system. So if a ship owner company is with the ship under its fleet, the ISM company should not change the ship to its fleet because this functionality isn't ready. So if they change the ship in the fleet, they are changing in the fleet of the MRV regulation, and it may be required a partial for the FuelEU for the MRV. So this will be further detailed how to be done in the FuelEU scope, and we will further detail this approach in the July webinar. There was a question regarding the timeline for the pooling. So what the FuelEU Maritime Regulation foresees is the deadlines for the submissions. So the deadline for the verified compliance balance that is needed to start the process of the pooling, because the pooling mechanism starts with understanding what it is the attained compliance balance for each ship that is participating in the pooling. So if the verified compliance balance is sent at its deadline, so the pooling will start by the end of March. This doesn't mean that the verified compliance balance cannot be achieved by the end of January. If the company submits early July FuelEU report, the verified does the verification till the end of January. This means that the pooling process can start in January. And Then there is the deadline to submit the allocation to be verified by the verifier of the pooling, and the deadline is by the end of April. So if the deadlines in the regulation is followed, this means the pooling will happen in the month of April. If the companies and the verifiers anticipate the deadlines, starting early January, we can have a pooling approved by the end of January. So it will depend on how the companies and the verifiers decide to do their actions in the system and decides to follow the compliance. If they follow always the deadline, so the pooling mechanism will be used during the month of April, but they can start earlier that process. And more related to the system and the workflow, I think this was the main questions. Or Peter, if not
Yes.
anything else.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I just handle quickly two questions very briefly. One was about the last one that came in. Do all vessels in the pool have to use the same verifier? Here the answer is no. They can have different verifiers for the monitoring plans, for the report, but there has to be one verifier that is verifying the pool itself. And another question that came in at the beginning is what will happen, is what is happening to vessels under 5,000 gross tonnage. So here the regulation is clearly applying for those that are above 5,000 gross tonnage. But during the negotiations, of the FuelEU regulation, there were some positions from some member states and also from some NGOs that the coverage should actually be extended to above 400 gross tonnage, but finally a decision will be taken against this. But it's possible that at the review of the regulation in 2027, this issue will be considered again or reconsidered again. So there's a major review that is required that will happen in 2027, where we will have to look at all the functioning of the regulation, its impact on competitiveness, administrative burden, also aligning it with the international approach. So we are already obviously gathering topics for consideration for this review. But I think otherwise that's it. I think we tackled almost all the questions that are there, but those that we didn't answer orally now, as I said, we are collecting all the questions also from the morning session, and we'll be answering them in writing, and we will publish this document both on the EMSA and also on the DG Move website. As I mentioned before, just to recall again that FAQ is forthcoming. It should be published by mid-June, late June as latest. It's going through the final revision and review in DG Move. Then the helpdesk is up and running. You can send questions to us on the functional mailbox, and I try to show again the mailbox address. I will put it into the chat. We will share the presentations, the slides, as soon as possible, and also we recorded this webinar, and we will publish the recordings also on the EMSA and the DG Move website. So I think we can leave it here, and thank you again for everybody's participations. Thank you for Jose, Caroline, and Ricardo for your presentations and for answering the questions. And as we said, further webinars, further events will be coming up, so I hope to see you there. And thank you for your attention for today. And I close the meeting with this. Bye-bye.